Hi Nitya, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Hello everyone, very good morning. Thanks for joining for today's class.
Good evening, Karthik. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, not sure about Raji. Let's get started for today. So today we are in day 17. We have successfully completed 15 days of learning Java. Now we are in day 17, where we are going to see the topics first. So we are going to see in and out of exceptions, handling what is exception, in and out of it. This is the only topic which we are going to talk or learn today. So in the first part of the class, I'll be teaching about like what is an exception, what is exception handling, and how to handle the exceptions in Java, what is syntax used to handle the exceptions, and what are different types of exceptions we have. And then second part of the class, I'm going to start writing a code wherein I'm going to replicate the exceptions, and then I'm going to have other set of code where I'm going to handle it, how efficiently you can handle it. Okay, these are some of the runtime exceptions which we are going to start learning today. And remaining exceptions like we can easily go through, it will be the same, logic will be the same. Okay, one is syntax will be different. All right. So before we get started, anyone have any questions before we get into exception handling? Any other topics or anything you want to discuss or any questions or doubts? So far, no. All right. Good. Okay. Now we are going to start with exception handling. So first we will see what is an exception, right? So let's say, as usual, I start from putting a diagram. Right? So let's say it is your class. In this class, you are writing some piece of code, right? So let's say you are having class, let's say demo. In this demo class, you are having piece of code, and in which you are having like, let's say 100 lines of code you have. Okay. And these hundreds of lines of code, when you're writing it, you know the logic, what it is supposed to do. But not always all the logic will works as we expect, right? It can be different reason, right? It can be data issue, it can be resources issue, it can be anything like that, right? So let's say you are having list of statements 1, 2, 3, 4, and then let's say you have 100 lines of code in your program, right? So whenever you write a program, you won't be able to just say that your program will have only 100 lines or 50 lines, right? It can be anything based on the logic how you're implementing, based on the business requirement, all the stuff, right? So this is like a dynamic, right? You can have a number of statements in your program, right? But let's assume something happens in the line number 2, some error or something, let's say some termination of your program. Okay, so let's say your program is going to get terminated. Okay, so your program is going to be terminated at line number or say statement number 2. So what will happen to the remaining statements? So you have written a logic from 1 to 100 to do some action, right? But for some reason your program is going to terminate by line number or statement number 2. So what will happen to this base, right? Statement 3 to 100. It won't get executed, isn't it? Because your program is going to terminate abnormally. What is abnormally? Abnormally means it is going to terminate at the point of time, the statement number 2, without having any trace of what happens. It simply terminates. You won't get the trace of what happened. So when we talk about exception, what is an exception first? Okay, abnormal condition that disturbs the normal flow of a program. There is nothing but the exception. So if anything happens here, let's say in the statement number 2, the abnormal condition happens, which in turns break your program not to execute line number 3 to 100 statements, right? Which means your program gets terminated abnormally. This particular logic or this particular condition, whatever happens, that is called exception in Java. So the abnormal condition that disturbs the normal flow of a program, isn't it? So that is called exception. What is exception handling? Just because you are getting this kind of exception, you cannot simply split into multiple methods and do handle it, right? In Java, you can do that, isn't it? Let's say you have like statement 1 to 100, and you can separate it by each statement into multiple methods, and you can call each method, and you can do that. But what will happen if you get abnormal termination? The control will come out of this class flow. The control will come out of the class. Even the remaining methods also will won't get executed. So we have to handle this exception. That mechanism they call it as exception handling, which means to avoid the abnormal termination of a program. What does it mean? It means like you are not going to stop this to happen, right? When the termination happens, it will happen. You are not going to stop that exception, but you are going to handle the exception. Okay? Some people understood mistakenly saying that you can avoid exceptions if you do handle exceptions. No, even if you handle the exceptions, you will still get the error. But the difference is that, let's say if you handle this piece of code with exception handling, and if the error or if any exception happens at line number 2, it will be traced, it will be catched, but remaining set of lines of code will be executed. With the exception, the remaining piece of code will be executed. Without exception, it gets terminated here itself, and nothing will be executed. Okay, that is the reason we call it as handling the exceptions. We are not saying avoiding the exception, right? So exception handling is to avoid the abnormal termination. So basically, whatever the logic you are written here is going to be the same. You are not going to change the logic, but you are going to avoid only abnormal termination. Okay, but still the problem exists in the line number 2. But how we are going to handle it is what they call it as exception handling. Okay, and why do we need to handle this exception? Because the rest of the code won't get executed if the exception is not handled properly, isn't it? So you are going to write this set of statement, let's say 1 to 100, and let's say you are having a file which contains, let's say, 100 records. Okay, so you are going to process one by one. Okay, and each record you're going to process 100 lines of code. Okay, 100 statements. So if any of the record, if it gets executed and if it gets abnormal terminated, then that's it. The control will come out of this class. Then it won't execute 3 to 100. Also, it won't execute the remaining set of code of the 5 records, isn't it? So how we can do? If we handle this one efficiently, we can trace it separately. What type of exception handle? What type of exception was passed for what record? And then you can put it in a message, or like you can put it in a separate array list or whatnot, right? You can define it, and then you can finally print that. Then finally, by end of this program execution, you can see what records are success, what records are failed. You can segregate that. What records are failed, what records are success. You can put it in either in the log or you can put it in a file, whatever you can do. Okay. So this is called exception handling, and this is very, very important to understand why we need to handle the exception, because you want to process the remaining part of the task or the code, right? So now we are going to get into how to use exception handling. Okay. Anyone have any questions about the core concept, exception handling, and why do we need to do this? So how to handle the exception with the help of some of the keywords which was reserved in Java. When I say reserved keywords in Java, they are all having some meaning for it, right? So there are like 5 reserved keywords you can use to handle the exceptions in Java. You can say try, catch, finally, throw, and throw. Okay, these are the keywords which you can use it. So when I say try, which means you are trying something, right? So let's say you're writing this piece of code, and you're writing this piece of code where you have 100 statements, right? And you, as a developer, when you write this logic, you assume or you think like there is a possibility that then error can happen or any exception can happen in this piece of code. Then what you can do, you can try this piece of code. Why they name it as try means you can try this piece of code, and if any exception happens, you will try this one. If anything exception happens, you can catch it. That's the logic. That is why they created like separate thing. Okay, try and catch. Wherever you feel that like you want to try or you want to see if any exception happens or not, then you can surround that piece of statements with try block. So when I say try block, what you have to do is in the try, you have to place the exception code. It means wherever you feel that you are going to get an exception or you are going to see the exception for sure. Okay. And then catch is to handle the exception. The way how to handle is, if you can see here, this is a syntax, simple syntax, where you have to say try, then the block. Block is nothing but the curly braces in Java, right? Anything surrounded with curly braces are nothing but a block, right? So we can say it as try block, catch block. So in the try block, you are put your code statements wherever you think like any exception happens in this piece of code, and whatever happens here, if any exception happens here, it will be catched in the catch block. Okay, catch means something, but if anything happens here, you are catching here, and then you are going to handle it. Okay, however you want. You're going to see some real-time program. You will see. So in the catch block is to handle the exception, whatever is thrown in the try block. And then you can have finally. So finally is a keyword in Java. Basically, it is another block. Basically, here you can handle any important code. Let's say you are writing this line of code, right? This line of code in the sample program. You have 100 lines of code, right? So let's say first line, first record is getting executed successfully, right? Maybe you can say in the finally block, you can say record number 1 executed successfully. Then when you are taking the second record, let's say successfully, so second record executed. The third record, let's say it is throwing some exception. Let's say line number 2, right? And it got it was catched in the catch block, but still you want to know whether the third record was executed or not, right? Then you can say third record got executed like that. So whatever the important code you think, if you want to handle or if you want to use it in your program, you can put in the finally block, irrespective of whether the exception is handled or not. So what does it mean? If any exception happens here, right, this line number 3 to 10 or 3 to 100 won't get executed, isn't it, for that particular record, right? When you have a exception handling, but still the finally will be executed. Okay, final means finally after you handle the exception or not handling the exception, you will be able to execute that piece of code. It based on the requirement use cases. You have to appropriately you have to add the piece of code over there, the finally block. And there are two more keywords. You can say throw and throws. So throw is nothing but a keyword. If you guys see here, it's kind of a game, right? Let's say you're trying something, and if something is thrown, you are going to catch it, and finally you are going to do whatever the main thing, right? And if you want to throw something an exception from here, let's say you're trying something, right? Inside you are feel that okay, I need to throw some exception, then you can throw it here, and then that will be catched in the catch block. Okay, if we want to throw an exception, we can use the keyword throw, and if you want to handle the exception with the help of declaring the exception, right? By declaration. Okay, there are two ways. Either you can throw an exception or you can declare the exception. So let's say you are having this piece of code, right? Try block, catch block, final block. And then instead of doing this try catch, let's say what you can do other way of doing is you can write a method. You can have a method. Let's say that method name is void m1 now, right? And then you can say throws exception, then your code logic. Okay, so what does it mean? If anything is getting thrown here, it will be handled by this exception with the help of throws keyword. Either you can use try catch block or you can go for throws keyword. I will show you guys. Okay. So these are the ways that we have to use it to handle the exception. And the general syntax for handling exception in Java is you will have a try block and you will have a catch block, and then you may or may not have a final block. Okay, let me show you guys what are the different ways that you can handle exception. So is it clear, like all of you guys, the what is the need for this result keywords to handle the exception in Java?
Yeah, Karthik.
Oh yeah, right? Okay. So now what we are going to do here is what are the different types of syntax we have with respect to exception handling. So the main syntax is nothing but like just to try and catch. Okay, you are trying something, and if any exception happens, you are going to catch it here. So you guys notice here, right? Catch of exception E. You will see what is the exception number and what is the use of E. Okay, and if you guys see here, anything happens here in this piece of code, it will be catched here. This is one syntax. Second is you are trying something, but irrespective of whether it happens or not, you are just going to execute some finally. Okay, let's say closing the database connection or whatnot, right? Whether the code is uninterruptedly abnormally submitted or not, but you want to close the connection or you want to close the stream or buffer or whatnot. So all those stuff you can put it in the finally step. Okay. The third one is you can have try, and if any exceptions occurs here, it will be catched in the catch block. But still, if you want to have some finally you want to write something like or do some action, you can still do it with the help of finally block. So basically the syntax is one is try with catch. These are combinations. Okay. One is with try and catch. The other one is try and finally. The other one is all three. Try, catch, and finally. The fourth syntax is you have try and then you can have catch, right? So this catch, if you guys see here I said exception E, and here I say SQL exception ES, null pointer exception E, right? So you can define multiple types of exception. We are going to see what are different types of exception in the next slide. But before we get into that, just assume exception is what we are going to handle it, right? When I say exception, if you want to get deeper into what type of exception happens or happened in your program, then you can catch it appropriately. Okay, let's say you're writing some piece of code here, and you are expecting, let's say, it may happen, it may throw null pointer exception, or it may throw SQL exception, or it may throw some other exception. Okay, for now, when you develop this code, you are assuming that these are two options or these are two exceptions might happen. So then what you can do after you try block, you can say catch null pointer exception, then catch SQL exception. And if anything other than this exception happens, that will be catched in the exception, the last catch. Is it clear? So basically, this is a very generic exception. Is a generic. These are all very specific to particular type of exception. So you have to arrange or order it based on what you are expecting. Let's say always generic should be lost. The flow of execution will be from top-down approach, right? Java is a top-down approach, Java code execution. So first it will check. Let's say in your program it is throwing some null pointer exception. So what happens here? It will check here. Okay, catch of null pointer exception. Yes. Okay, null pointer exception is thrown. So it is catched here. That's all. It won't execute catch of this one and catch of this one. Let's assume second scenario. Your program is throwing some SQL exception. So it will first check here. Okay, this is only handling null pointer exception, so it won't go here. So it will check only here. Okay, SQL exception. Yes, it is catched. Then it won't execute this catch of exception here. Assume that your program here is throwing some array index out of bound index exception, array index out of bound exception. Okay, so it will try here, it will check here. Okay, null pointer. So my exception is different. So it won't be catched here. That index out of bound is not going to catch in the SQL exception. But finally, it is going to get catched in the exception class. Okay, because exception is the master or the subclass class. I will explain what are the different types. Okay, so now even you can say nested also. You will see what are the thumb rules you should follow whenever you write exception handling. Okay, so basically, try cannot be alone. Whenever you write a program, you're trying something. Either you should catch it or you should use it finally. You cannot simply have only try. So these are the things that you have to be see in your program where you have written test or anything. They want to test your knowledge, right? They will just simply say try, and then there won't be catch, there won't be fine. Then it means that it's not try, right? So try can't be alone, and similarly catch block also can't be alone. Without try, you cannot have a catch, and also between try and catch, you cannot have any statements. Okay, so try can have either catch or final block. You guys got it here, right? The try can have either catch or the try can have final. Final
So,
block.
Karthik,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So, as we are handling exception in catch block, so if try is with finally, so what can be the scenario? I mean, how will handle those exception then?
So just with try and finally, right?
Yeah. I mean, what can be the scenario? If I mean, why I'm asking, like in catch, we are handling exception, like let's suppose null pointer exception or this SQL exception.
Mhm.
But in try and finally, how we will do that?
Okay, in try and finally, actually, we are not catching the exception, right?
Yeah,
What you can do
yeah.
is, in the try itself, you can throw an exception. Okay.
Okay,
So there are two types of exception. Like whatever the exceptions defined by Oracle team, they call it as um, exceptions, okay, or
mm-hmm.
out of box kind of exception, okay. The language different.
Mm-hmm.
You can also create your own exception. Let's say you can
Okay,
create one class. Let's say class my own exception, which extends exception class. In that you can overwrite it, and that exception class you can throw it here. And whenever you throw it here, the class which is calling this particular piece of code, that will be receiving this particular whatever the exception you're throwing from here. That is where you will use the throw keyword.
okay,
Okay.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So try can have either catch or finally, and finally block should be always in the last. Okay, if you try to add some statement here between try block and finally block, it will throw a compile time error. Similarly, like here, try and catch, if you write any statement here, it will throw compile time error wherever it is. Because finally we should be always last because they want to execute only on the last. But for sure it will execute. Okay. So you can have multi-level catch blocks are possible. Then when I say multi-level, these are the levels, right? You can order it. So basically you have to order from specific exceptions to generic. If you put this exception, generic exception in the first, and then you are adding like let's say null pointer exception or SQL exception or array index out of bound exception, whatever exception happens, it will be always go to the first block, which is exception block, because exception is a generic one, right? And if you want to capture the exception happens, if you want to know exactly what type of exception happened, the runtime, then you have to order it in the multi-level catch block. Accordingly, starts from your specific exceptions, and the last should be a finally it should be a generic one, because you are anticipating that your code might throw any of these two. And what will happen if these two was not thrown and some other exception was thrown? Then that should be captured here. That is the reason you are adding this one, right? So because if it anything happens, either null pointer means it will catch here, or if it any SQL exception happens, it will catch here. But anything other than these two exceptions, if it is thrown here in the try block, then that has to be also captured, right? That has to be catched. Then that is where you are putting in the exception base class object. So we have to order it from the specific exceptions to generic one. Okay, at a time only one exception is occurred. So let's say your program is having like multiple lines of code, and you feel that like multiple types of exceptions can happen in your try block. But for sure, only one exceptions will be catched, which means only if first exception happens, that's all. Then it will be looking for the catch block to catch that exception. Otherwise, your code won't get executed, isn't it? Then ambiguous problem will come. That is the reason at a time only one exception will be occurred, right? Which means like it won't execute the remaining piece of the code, and it will be catched somewhere, and then it will go and execute the remaining piece of code. So at a time, only one catch block will be executed. This also same, true, right? If it goes here, the null pointer block, then it won't go to this others because it's already catched, right? It's kind of a match. When I say cricket match, right? You're hitting something here, you're trying to bat, and someone is going to catch it, right? And if none of these fielders are going to catch the ball, then let's say the captain or someone is going to catch for sure, like that, or the wicket keeper, something like that. Okay. So at a time, only one catch block will be executed, and the nested exceptions also happens, right? You can also have nested try block. You have try and catch, and within the try catch also you can have some other try catch blocks. So the best practice to use exception handling is you can go for try catch, and whenever you go for try catch, the place you feel that like the error can happen, you can add the try catch over there. Okay, and whenever you write any program in Java without handling exception is definitely not a advisable code. Okay, whenever if someone asks you to write a program in your interview or somewhere, always starts with writing exception handling, so that like you know how to write a clean code, right? That's how they will understand. So these are the ways, or these are the syntaxes we can use it to handle exception. So now let's get into the second topic of what are the different types of exception we have. Then second part of the class, we are going to start writing the code for handling this. Okay. So when I say different types of exception, whenever I say exception is handled by the developer, which means the developer is not writing a logic to handle that exception. Okay, we are going to just use the logic or use the already existing exception class objects to handle it. Okay, because already Oracle developers created a list of classes to handle that, and we are just going to use it appropriately in our program. Okay, so there is a class called throwable. Throwable is a class in Java. Most of the people think that it is an interface. No, it is a class. Okay, throwable is a class in Java which comes from java.lang package. So whenever you try to use something in your program and which is part of java.lang package, which means you don't need to explicitly import it because it comes from the language itself. If something like you are trying to import or use some classes which is part of, let's say, util package or something like that, right? Then you have to explicitly mention that import statement. But since the throwable class is part of java.lang package, we don't need to specifically say that you want to import this throwable class. So basically, throwable is a class in Java, and in which we have a base class, child class called exception. So exception is another class in Java, and under exception you have different types of or different style classes. Okay, so when I say exception, if you guys see here, when we are handling here, exception is a parent class, and all these classes are child classes. If you want to handle any type of exception, always the parent should be lost. Only then, if none of the childs are getting handled, then parent will be handled, right? So if you guys see here, exception is a class which is child class of throwable class. Under exception, you have like multiple child classes, and you have IO exception class, SQL exception class, class not found exception. There are multiple exception classes they have defined. Based on the requirement, you have to use it appropriately, or based on the logic which you are going to deal with that in our program. So whenever I say IO exception, right, input output, whenever your code is going to deal with some your input output operations, then you can go for IO exception. Okay, which means like if IO operation is failed for what not reason, right, then it should be handled with the help of IO exception class. Similarly, if your code is going to deal with some database CRUD operations, right, read, write, create or update, or any operations with, or any deal with database. If you feel like any exception is going to happen, then you can go for SQL exception. Okay, if any DB operations is going to fail, it is going to go this exception. Then class not found exception is something like, let's say you are trying to create an object for a class and that class is not exist in your class path or whatnot, right? Then that class is not found, right? If you guys see here, they have defined this exception with the meaningful name. So we can understand from that what does it is going to do. So class not found exception is going to thrown whenever your code is looking for a class which is not exist, then it is going to throw it. Another one is runtime exception. So runtime exceptions are nothing but it is going to thrown at the runtime, isn't it? So within runtime exception, they have multiple child classes. One is arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception, index out of bounds exception. Within that, they have array index or string index. You will see some of them, and whenever you guys go through the documentation of Oracle for exception handling, you will see some other different exceptions. But one good part is that whenever they create these exception classes, the name is kind of a self-explanatory. From that, you can able to understand. So you guys don't need to worry about it. So whenever I say runtime exception, these exceptions are going to happen in the runtime. Okay. So arithmetic exceptions are nothing but whenever you try to deal with any arithmetic operations, right? Multiplication, division, or anything like that, right? Let's say you are trying to 9 divided by 0, which is infinity, right? So this infinite is going to throw an error, right? You are going to handle it. Null pointer exceptions are nothing but let's say you are trying to do some operation on the null object, okay, on the null, okay, then it is going to be handled. And you are going to see number format. So you are going to format the number, or you are going to change one data type to another data type. Then you will be seeing the exception which will be handled with the help of number format exception class. Whenever I say index out of bound, which means out of bound index, you guys know that index is nothing but even yesterday's class we have seen in the string object, the string class, whatever we deal with string, right? Each characters in the string class or the string literals, we call it as we are defined by the index, right? Starts with 0. In array also we can have indexes to hold the data, right? So if that index is out of bound means something but not in range, right? Then those kind of exceptions are going to handle in the index out of bounds. Under that there are two type classes. One is for array index, other one is string index. We will see one by one. But array index means whenever you deal with array and you are trying to store some data which is out of your length or the capacity, then you will see this error. And similarly in string also the same case. So in short, you have list of exception classes which is already defined by Oracle development team. And as a developer, we have to use this in our piece of code appropriately wherever we feel. And if you feel that like you don't know in your code which exception is going to happen, right? So the best bet is to go for exception. But always it is recommended to have your piece of code like this. Okay, handle the different types of exception first, and then finally go for generic exception. The reason is that if you simply put exception, then you will get an exception message saying that what type of exception was happened. But if you handle it in this way, right, you will see, you know what, in the catch block, you can write a sys statement saying, null pointer exception happened here. Here, SQL exception happened here, like that, right? Here, if you say exception happens, right, then from that you don't know what type of exception actually happens, isn't it? That is the reason it is always advisable to handle with multi-level of catch blocks. You can able to write this piece of code like this only if you know what are different types of exceptions we can use it above this generic exception, right? That is the reason we should know how all this works. And the other portion is called error. Okay. In the throwable class, we have exception and error. So people will get confused between exception and error. Okay. Even the next video is something like we are going to talk about what is an error, what is an exception, what is the difference between exception and error. Because they will be asking how you'll handle the exceptions and errors. So errors are nothing but let's say you're writing your program and your program logic is going to utilize the resources, isn't it? And those resources you don't know how it is going to be performed in the runtime, right? Let's say you are setting your heap memory, let's say 512 MB, and your program is let's say 1000 lines of code, and you are like creating some 1000 objects, and for some reason the 1000 objects are not able to handle within this 512 MB of heap memory. Then your program is trying to create an object in the heap in the 1000th object, and the 1000th object is not able to create an object in heap because you don't have memory in the heap. Then it is going to throw an error, let's say out of memory error. Similarly, virtual machine error, which means like in the JVM, whenever it is going to execute in the server, you will see this kind of error. And stack overflow also same. whenever you are trying to uh, do multiple operations, and when it's not able to handle that, then it is going to throw stack overflow because of multiple reasons in the real time. So these are different types of exceptions and errors. So basically, exceptions can be handled by the developers, but errors cannot be handled by the developers. Even if you guys see here, even till now today, lot of applications are still having out of memory error, all the stuff. So the only resolution what we can do is they can increase the heap memory, they can tune the infrastructure level, the resource level, right? How much you want to allocate to that. Let's say you have your laptop and you have 8 GB of RAM, and first you are allocating only 512 MB of memory to your heap in your Eclipse. When you run your program, you can allocate it, isn't it? In the JVM VM arguments, you can allocate how much you want to allocate for your heap. Let's say you are writing a piece of code and that code is having, let's say, 1,000 objects you are creating it, and or you are creating in like in the loop, right? You are keep on creating objects. So assume that all the objects are getting stored in the heap, and now it is not having any space, right? Now it has to throw an error. That is nothing but out of memory error. But how much memory you have in your program or in your infrastructure, the developer doesn't know, right? Because every environment will be different. So these are all not controlled by the developers, and developers, whatever they write a logic, and on their logic, if anything error happens, there is nothing but exceptions which can be handled, but errors cannot be handled, and errors won't occur because of your logic. Okay, errors will be occurs because of resources. Okay, this is the difference between exception and error. We will see what are the different types of exception we have, and then how we are going to write a program and see how it works. And there are two types of exception in general within exception. They call it as compile time exception and runtime exception. We will see in and out of it in the second part of the class. We are going to regroup in 2 minutes and we will go through that. Before we wind up, anyone have any questions? Okay, shall we wind up and we can regroup in 2 minutes?
Hello.
Yeah.
Karthik, you mentioned difference between exception and error. Can you please come again?
Sure. Can we regroup and I can explain it one more time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. We can start the second part of the class. Yeah, Jashi, so you are talking about, you want to know again the exception and error, right? The difference between that and what is exception error, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say you're writing your program logic, okay, and the logic, whatever you're writing, let's say you are dealing with a database or you are writing some operations within the file, you're reading a file or you are writing something in the file or even you're doing some calculations or logics, right? You deal with thing or anything with respect to collection or anything, right? If any if any of that logic is going to happen or any of the logic is going to fail in the runtime, right? That you can handle it with the help of runtime exception in your piece. Okay. Which means let's say you're writing some logic, right? 9 by 10 and 9 by 0 and it should be instant, right? So you are going to handle it. So you know, okay, one of the record you are getting it as 9 and you're trying to get it to 0 and you are getting it as 10, so you're going to handle it. So you can know, you can tell that, okay, this data is not valid like that. Okay, which means you are able to control that, right? What type of exceptions happen. Okay. Let's say IO exception, SQL exception, class not found exceptions are not something like cached exception. There are two types. Okay, they call it as cached exception. They can call it with different ways. Okay, I will tell you. So one is something called secret exception or cached exception. Second type is called unchecked exception or uncatched exception or it's also called runtime exception. Okay, this is called as compile time exception. So basically, all are same. Okay, secret exception means you are going to check this piece of code before you are going to execute the code. Okay, because the moment you write your code and you are dealing with some database operation, then it will automatically tell you, okay, to handle this secret exception. The compiler will tell you, right? Whenever the code is defined and compiler will check, okay, see, you are trying to deal with some database operation. So I'm going to, you have to handle it. Okay, which means compiler is going to tell you, or you are going to handle it before you execute the piece of code. That is why they call it as compile time exception or catch
Mm-hmm.
exception. Catch means you are catching it before you run the program, right? And check means you are checking
Yes.
it before you run the program. Okay. The second is other opposite. Okay, which means runtime exception. So let's say these are all the runtime exceptions, right? So you are going to have, let's say you are going to have some logic, and the runtime you are going to get a value. Okay, and let's say you are saying a by b, a by b, and in the runtime if you are getting b value of 0, then that will be a runtime exception. You don't know what type of data you are going to get it, right? If anything happens like that,
Yes.
we call it as runtime exception or uncatched exception, which means you are not able to catch it beforehand before you execute the program.
Mm-hmm.
Which means unchecked,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't check it before you execute the program, right? So this
Okay. Okay.
exception itself. So in terms of catch or compile time or runtime, you are responsible for this. Okay? Your application code needs to be handled, right? In this case, right? Because you are dealing
Yes.
with data and you are going to handle it. But in case of error is happens because not of your program logic. Error is happened because of resource constraints or whatnot. Okay. So whatever the
Hmm.
program, that program is needs resource, right? Because we know we have stack, we have heap, and even string pool. Right? In a bigger application, enterprise application, the string pool concept we have defined the server itself. What is the pool uh, capacity? Okay, you will define
Mm-hmm.
string pool capacity. Let's say equal to 10. Okay, and let's say you are creating so many objects and it is exceeding this limit, then it will throw an error. So these kind of resource related errors is called nothing but error. Okay, these
Okay.
errors are not because
Yes.
of
Yes.
program logic. Since it is not related to program logic, developer cannot handle it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it will be thrown
Yes. Yes. Got it.
unit after we get the error. There is no way that we can handle this error. We can handle only the exception. There is a difference between exception and error.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Now let's go one by one. Like arithmetic expression, we can start. Now let's go to the coding part. So in order to demonstrate this one, I would like to say I'm going to create two classes. One is with exception handling, the other one is without exception handling. Okay, meaning I am going to reproduce this issue first, and I'm going to show you guys how to handle it. So you will get in and out of it. Okay, so I'm going to say exceptions not handled. Then use one class. Similarly, I'm going to create another class where I'm going to execute side by side, so you guys will understand. Exceptions handling them. Okay. So now let's start with first one, nothing but arithmetic exception. So what is arithmetic exception handling? Whenever you deal with something with arithmetic operations, isn't it? Right? So if you guys see here, I'm taking simple example. Int a equal to 5, int b equal to a divided by 0. Okay. Now I'm trying to handle this without an exception. So this is handle, not handle, right? So here what I'm going to say, int a equal to 5 and int b is equal to let's say 0, right? And let's say int c is equal to a divided by b. And then in the sysout statement, I'm going to say the rest of the code. So what will happen here? It is going to see, okay, it stored a with the value 5, b with 0, and try to do b with 5, 5 by 0. Let me go and explore. See, we are getting arithmetic exception 5 divided by 0 on the line number Java 9, which means line number 9. This is how you have to understand this exception message. Okay, guys. Now the same code I'm going to handle it in this class. The way how I'm going to handle it, I'm going to surround with try catch block, right? So try catch block. What I'm going to do, but whatever the code I have, if I feel that okay, it can throw an error, I have to put that into the try catch first, and then in the exception I can say you have different types of exceptions, right? You can simply say arithmetic exception. Let's say okay, what does it mean here? Arithmetic exception is in a class, right? Let me open this. You guys see here, arithmetic exception is extending runtime exception. Runtime exception is nothing but a class which extends exception. Is it matched with this diagram? Arithmetic exception is a class which extends runtime exception. Runtime exception is a class which extends exception class, isn't it? Now let's get into here. Okay, we are creating an object for this class, right? Now what we're trying to do here is we're going to simply say sysout of ee dot. You can say just what is the message it was thrown. That's the message. Now if you guys see here, let me run this program. You guys see here, divide by 0. It is not throwing that exception message, which means you are able to get that, right? What type of exception happens? Let's say you can put something arithmetic exception happens here, like that. So whenever you run your program, you know, okay, there is an arithmetic exception happens in something but what is. If you guys see here, the same thing I have written here. So if you run this program, you're going to get this error, right? But if you see this one, right, let's say with the try catch block, you won't see that. The beauty of the thing is, you can also see the rest of the code. If you see, I will put one thing, rest of the code in try block. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing here.
So Karthik, this rest of the code, it will not execute that println statement.
Correct. It won't execute here because exception happened already in the line number 11. So it won't.
Yes.
It came loop or not loop. It came out of this block and it was catched here. And after that, now I'm going to run this program again. In case you see this line of code is executed. This line of okay. See here. This line was not executed, whatever you try to print, right? Let's say you have some other logics, whatever you have something here. After this try catch, you are dealing with something else, right? That remaining part of the program will execute. That is what it means. When I say the rest of the code outside try. Inside
Okay.
happen, it won't execute. Line number 12 is not going to execute. But line number 20, yeah.
So basically, whatever we write under this try block, that will not execute once we get exception.
Correct.
Okay.
The reason why I'm trying to print this one, Jesse, is that if you guys see try, let's say exception happens at line number 11. Now line number 12 won't get executed. First the concept. Second one is the control goes to the catch directly, right? That is the reason I write. So line number 16 got executed. That is why you are getting this message, right? And once it goes to catch, your program is not going to get terminate. Okay, still the remaining, what are the logic you have in this particular method, you can able to execute or you can able to run that. So that is the reason I'm just saying here, like just the rest of the code, the program, or rest of the program.
Now, let's suppose a try is only one, right? And for try, we will be having multiple catch.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's suppose I am having multiple, I have to handle multiple exceptions. Like as you showed one, multiple catch statements. So as in try, whenever first exception occur, that time it is not executing the remaining part of the code, right? In that particular block.
What is it? Can you come again?
Okay. So in try, let's suppose I'm having two, three exceptions, but whatever the first exception I'm getting,
Correct.
so for that only it will execute the catch statement against it.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
actually right.
So
Even
remaining
it's possible.
remaining catch will
Yeah, whichever is coming first, or whichever you are able to throw that error, or throw that exception, that will be catched appropriately in the catch block.
okay, okay. Mm-hmm.
Now I'm getting error here. Still exception, right? What is it say? What does it say? Remove catch block. Uh, oh, SQL exception is not a runtime exception, right? That will be thrown by the compiler. Let's say I can say null pointer exception, something like that. Do you see here? Let me show this. So when I say null pointer, right, which means like, do you see here? Null pointer, arithmetic, number format, these are all the runtime exceptions. So checked exceptions are nothing but it will be handled when before you run the code by the compiler itself, right? So you cannot use that one here, right? So when I say null pointer exception, if anything happens here, so let's say your piece of code is having two piece of exceptions here, possibilities, right? But whichever comes first, it is going to get catched. Is it clear?
So this
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. So this SQL exception, no need to handle. It will handle by the system while compiling the code.
Whenever you write your code and whenever your code says that you are trying to, let's say you are talking to JDBC, right? And
Yeah.
whenever you write the
Yes.
code, it automatically says that you have to handle it. Since I'm not handling,
Hmm.
since I'm not having a piece of code with a database connection, that is the reason I was not able to
Yes.
do this here. Okay,
Acha. Okay. Got it. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. Either you can handle with the try catch, the catch itself you can say SQL exception, or you can say throws SQL exception. Either way you can do it.
Yeah. Got it.
Okay. So I hope this is clear. Now where is my try is ending? Try is ending here, catch is ending here, right? And this is the main, right? So now I'm going to just comment this piece of code. Okay. Now let's talk about the other exception because I'm using the same class to handle multiple exceptions. So first one we have seen arithmetic exception, right? Now we can see null pointer exception. Null pointer exception is something but let's say you are having some, let's say string s1 is equal to string s1 is equal to null. Okay. On that null, on that null object, you're trying to get let's say length or any method you're trying to call. So you cannot do any operation with null, isn't it? So then let me try to run this. See, java.nullPointer exception happens at the line number 15. Okay, line number 15 is this one, right? So null pointer exception happens. So how to handle this? The same thing. Let me put in the another class, this class, where we are going to handle this, right? As I said earlier, anything if you feel that like you want to handle the exception, you have to put it in the try block. And the catch block, you can simply say what type of exception you are anticipating, right? Let's say null pointer exception. So yeah, null pointer exception E, and then within that you can write your own logic, whatever you think like, let's say null pointer exception happens here or whatnot. Okay. So now what will happen is even if you have some piece of code here, the same applies to all the logics. Okay, so let's stop at 4. Okay, this is E. And if you guys have any remaining set of program, right? Remaining program still executes. Let me go on the next step. You guys see here, you're having some problem here, line number 30, which has been handled by this catch block, right? And then it is not stopping your program, right? Whatever the other methods or whatever you are going to do, it is still can able to execute. So this is the beauty of exception handling. If you don't handle it, what happens? Let's assume we have the same piece of rest of the code in the not handled scenario. And what will happen? Let me run it. See, you are not able to see this print of output, this out statement, right? Meaning like it's not permitted output,
Yes.
right? So this is how it actually works. So whenever you feel that you are dealing with some data, and if you are receiving some data, let's say you're receiving some user ID password from the user, and you want to manipulate it, first you have to check the null, right? In Java, Java 8, we have objects that are not null methods. We have entered some new methods. First, you have to check whether it's not null. Only then you have to do any operation with that to avoid all this null point exceptions. Okay. Now let's.
Just one question, Karthik. I
Yeah.
don't know whether it is valid or not. But let's suppose, I'm just learning, but I don't know the types of exception, like, this null pointer exception or, this
Uh-huh.
SQL exception like that.
Yeah.
So in that case, is there any way that, I can handle, all the exceptions in one go or whatever it is coming,
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
writing it,
Exactly. Let me show you the demo. Okay. Let's take the same.
Okay.
Okay. Now I am thinking it is throwing null pointer exception here, but in the runtime I don't know what is going to happen. Then what you can do here, you can simply go for exception class always. Okay. Which means you are directly calling the creating object for this class and you're calling it.
Hmm.
You don't know what
Okay.
exception is going to happen, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
right. You don't know different types of exceptions we have, but really you don't know what will happen in this piece of code, right? You are dealing with multiple
Yes.
operations, right? So what you can do
Mm-hmm.
if you run this, you see exception happens here. The message you are getting null
Null exception.
means it is null pointer.
Yeah. Okay.
That is how you have to learn. Okay. Otherwise, let me show you one more. Let's comment this guy and uncomment this guy. I will do the same thing. Okay. So null pointer exception is there. Instead of arithmetic exception directly handling it, right? Here also I'm putting the same piece of code. Let's say I don't know whether it's going to throw arithmetic or not, right? So what I can do, let me do this piece of code. The arithmetic, I can say this is exception, right? Let's say exception happens. Okay, and you can say now we will see that. If you see, exception happens here, divide by
Yeah. Divide by zero. Yes.
based on this, you will able to understand it, whether what exception happens in your program.
Yes. 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 Got it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, we have seen null pointer and the other one is arithmetic. Now I think we can move on to arithmetic we have seen and null pointer we have seen. Now string index out of bound exception. Okay, so when I say all the exceptions are handled by developers, so it is always important to if you create your own defined exception, you have to define the meaningful name so other developers will be able to understand it, right? So now we talk about string out of bound exceptions. Let's assume that I'm having string x1 is equal to new string of, okay. Assume that you are going to have, let's say, for text. Okay. So you have seen already, right? What does it mean, right? It creates object. and keep memory, and then going to use this literal string code, right? Now you are trying to say you are dealing with that particular thing, and you are trying to see what is the character at the index, let's say 50. Okay, so what will happen here? What is this method is going to do? Char at top 50. It is going to do what is the character at the index 50.
Character at 50.
Right. But already we have only Red9SysTech, which is like just 20 lines of not even 20, it is 10 or something, right? Now let me run this. See, string index out of bounds exception, string index out of range 50, right? Which means whatever you are trying to look at is not in the range what you have, right? You are looking out of the range, right? That is what it means. So that is the reason it didn't print this line number 21. Now I'm going to exactly handle the same thing with respect to exception handling. Okay. So as I said earlier, whenever I feel that I want to set something, I will always go for try. I will put the same code, and then in the catch, I can simply say, as JC you asked, I will first put this one to show you how it is going to print it. If I don't know exactly what type of exception it is going to throw, right? Let me first try to show you that. Exception happens here. Let me run this program. You will see here, exception happens here. String index out of range 50. So your program is not stopped, right? But you're still able to see what is the type of exception happens, right? Getting it here? You are not getting an exception.
Yes.
You handle it, right? So either you can go for exception like this, or you can go for string index out of bound exception. I can say ex, and I would say ex dot first. And if I say string, okay, now we'll see what is the unreachable for catch block. What does it mean? You guys read this. Unreachable catch block for string index
It should be
it is already handled by catch block.
catch block for
That is the reason I was telling you guys, always you have to put this one. Always you have to put the ordering tree is very important. Now it works,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's already handled by the parent guy, then you don't need to worry about the child handling, right? That is the purpose of it. Now you will see this line. It is going to execute the line number 46. See, string index exception happens here. It is line number 46 because it is matching exactly. You are creating object of that particular class, right? So it matches, so it catches here. Here you are creating object of exception class, right? Which is like a very generic. Any object or any exception is thrown from the try of any type, right? Of any type of, let's say, arithmetic, null pointer, runtime, whatnot, right? All are of type exception because this is a base class parent. These are all the child. If you feel that like you don't know exactly what type of exception you have to use, at least for sure you have to use exception in your program. Okay, so this is how you can able to handle the string out of bound index. Okay, now let me try to do the other one. What we have next. String in arithmetic we have seen, null point we have seen, string index out of bound exception we have seen, and now we can go for number format. Okay, so this is also quite common, right? Whenever you deal with any data, you will try to change, right? So what is the way that you can change string to integer in Java? So you have a method.
parsing.
Yeah.
Something like parse.
Correct. Integer dot parse of, you see here, you can pass a string, right? And that string, let's say I am passing 5. Okay, let's assume that you are getting it something like okay. You assume that like you are getting something like from the user or the UI component, let's say Angular or React, right? Some data they are passing it. For them, they are passing that string, but you want to do some mathematical logic over here, right? So now you have to do int a is equal to like this. You are going to pass it, right? Now you can deal anything in this. Let me run this program first. Okay, let me just put some pickup set. What is the value of a? What is the value of a? 5. Because you already converted this 5 from string to integer, right? Now instead of 5, I'm going to say register, right? Now what you're trying to do, you're going to convert some literal string into an integer, which is not possible, right? So it is throwing error saying number format exception for input string register at the line number 65, right? This line number 65, if you guys notice, right, whenever you are working on a project and whenever you see exception, always go from what is the Java line number. So you will see, okay, Java line number 24, which means this one. If you click on it, it is highlighted here. Right? This is the place where there is a problem. So now, how are we going to handle it in with respect to exception handling? This is what we are going to see it now. You know, so we have this piece of code, and I want to try it with this one, whatever I want to try it, and then the catch block. First, I will show you what the issue was asked. If you guys see here, if I just simply put try, it is throwing error. It will say try cannot be allowed. It can either to insert finally to complete. You guys saw that some rules, right? I was telling that what is that? Yeah, try can't be allowed, right? That is what it is showing. So we should have that here. And I will show you how it is going to print that playing number format exception. Exception happens here for input string, which means it is a number format exception. If you directly put number format exception, if you know already, right? Then you can go for that and it will show you the thing. But you will see what is the exception you can able to check it beforehand if you want to know it. So this is how you can able to handle number format exception. These are the multiple different types of exceptions you can handle it. I think one last thing I want to show you guys is quite common in any program's life is array index out of bound exception, right? We always deal with some arrays and we get those array index out of bound exceptions, right? So array index out of bound exception, what I'm trying to do here is I'm going to create an array and I'm going to define the size, and then after that I'm going to assign some value and I'm going to replicate that issue. Okay. So when I say array index exception handle, right? So I'm going to say integer array, let's say I is equal to, if you guys see here, I have written here, I don't know whether you can able to see this piece of code. I'm going to try to say, you guys see it here or now? This,
Yes, Karthik.
you
I can see.
right? It looks very dull, I mean, compared to this one. But even you can see here, if you guys want to reference. Okay.
Yes,
What I'm
yes,
trying to do
yes.
is I'm going to create an integer array of size 15 or 5 or whatnot. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to say, let's say 2. Okay. Which means I create an array of size 2. Okay. But now what I'm trying to do in array, you can able to insert a data or assign a value like this, right? But by passing
Mm-hmm.
the index, let's say if I want to say int of 0 is equal to, let's say 1. Okay. If you guys see here, not int of, sorry, I of 0 equal to 1, and similarly I of 1 is equal to 2, something else. Okay. Now if I run this program, there won't be any it works, right? It brings to an error.
Mm.
Now what I'm trying to do, I'm going to add a data into that array of more than that particular index, right? Let's say 2, right? Let's say 3. You already defined this array with only size 2, but you are trying to insert the value of 3 to the index of 2, which is no more there. See? Array index out of bound, etc. So one thumb rule is that whenever developers use any array index out of bound exception in their coding or in their application, what you can do is once the way how you have to debug is first you have to identify which piece of code is throwing that error. Then you have to see how they have defined that array and what is the real time value you got it, right? So that is the reason people don't go for array. They will go for array list. Array is of its size, and array list is a global array. Okay, we will talk when we go to corrections. But if in case you are using array for some reason in your application, right? Now you have to define what is the size you want in your array, right? If you already know that your data is not going to be more than 2, then you can go for array. Always better. But if you don't know really in the runtime or in the future how the data is going to be dynamically coming in, then you can go for array. So the same error, how you can handle it, the same thing, or whatever it is, the same logic, right? You can just simply put the try catch block, the try, which is the same logic, and then you can simply say the same catch statement. In this catch statement, you can simply say array index out of bounds exception is and what happens array index happens here, right? Let me run this here. This here, array index happens here. You will see what is that. The 2 is nothing but the size, right? On the index, this index is just throwing the error. When you try to insert the index 2, right? That is where it is throwing the error. But if you don't know that one, and if you simply say that you want to see the exception, that also you see simple exception or 20 exception if you want to have it. Yes, here, exception happens here. It means it's all array index out of order. Okay, you have a number of methods here. If you guys see here, you can go for localized message, you can go for get message, hashtag. These are all hash code is coming from the object class, right? By default, object is a base class for anything in Java. And you can also go for print stack trace if you want to print what is happened, right? Let's say instead of say you're trying to print this one. See that print stack trace, right? Which means that you want to not difficult, right? Now you see this what actually happened. You can able to see what was the error which happened. This is coming from the catch statement. It is not coming from this line number 54. Okay, this statement has been printed. The entire stack trace. What happened to the program? You can able to see. Okay, this is how you have to handle the exception in your program. So basically, you can summarize it quickly. So what we have seen today is the both the part of the classes we have seen what is an exception, what is exception handling. Exception nothing but abnormal condition that disturbs your normal flow of the program, and the way how you're going to handle it is nothing but exception handling. And why do we need to handle it? Otherwise, if you don't handle it, the rest of the code you won't be able to execute. How to handle it is by based on this by result figures. You can go for try catch and find it, or you can go for throw and throw. Either way you can do it. And finally something like whatever the exception happens or not or handled or not, you will be able to execute that particular block. And try is a place where you are going to put your code where you think like the exception can occur. And the catch is something like whatever the exception happens, you are going to catch it over there, and then you can able to So they use a different method. And different types of syntax we have seen. These are all possible syntaxes. Try cannot be alone, catch cannot be alone, and try always should be either having finally or catch, and you can have all the three, and you can have multi-level of catches, and also you can have mixed try catch. It depends on the logic how you want. And different types of exception we have, exception and error, all are coming under probable class. So if you are able to handle the exception before you execute the program, that is called compile time exception or catch exceptions. If you are handling it only through runtime, it is called runtime exception. Whatever we have seen today is all about runtime exception. If you write a code by connecting to a database, then automatically you will say the throw or you will say throw exception. Now you can say like that. So these are different types of exceptions we have seen in the real-time program, wherein we have seen like side by side, right? Where you are replicating the issue and how you're going to handle it, right? So I hope like you guys have understood this concept about exception and any questions before you end up for today?
No, Karthik, I'm good.
Are good?
No, Karthik, I'm good.
Okay, perfect. I hope you guys have learned new things today, right? That's great. All right then, we'll see tomorrow. Thank you everyone.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you. Thank you, Karthik.